All right, well, I've gotten the signal from Michael Weber that we can actually begin. There's some people in the hallway. He also told me that Austin, I've been here since 1992, but I did not know the proverbial fact about Austin, which is that people are generally not on time except for weddings and funerals. But I'm grateful that so many of you could get here as early as 8:30 in the morning. And my job is not so much to do the welcoming. Other people will do the welcoming, but I thought I would do some thanks. First of all, I should let you know that I'm Douglas Spio. I'm the director of the Center for European Studies, and therefore I'm officially the host of this event. I'm sort of, in Academy Awards terms, I'm the producer, and Michael Weber is the director. So if either of us come away with awards, it's thanks really to Michael for doing this and pulling it all together. So first of all, my thanks, Michael, for putting this together. Really, it's been wonderful working with you. We thought about this conference virtually 2 years ago, if not more, when I was applying for the funding from the European Union so that the Center for European Studies could become a EU Center of Excellence. And thanks to Michael, we were able to, in part because of Michael, we were able to win that award, which has helped fund this substantially. So first of all, my thanks to Michael. Actually, I should say my thanks to all of you again for coming in so early on this day. To my staff and Michael's staff, Rita is not here today, but many of you have probably heard from her, as well as Sally Dixon and Charlotte Harris, who are out there making sure that this all works, and the Kleenex group. I also want to thank the federal government, which makes my center a national resource center and therefore provides funding indirectly for this conference. Above all, in many ways, the European Union, which provided us with funding for this conference as well. In my field, which is not the energy field, we would call them patrons. I guess in your field, you would call them sponsors or donors. And the Cockrell School of Engineering has been a great contributor, as well as the College of Liberal Arts. And we'll hear from the deans of both of those colleges. They've been great supporters of the center and Michael's work here as well. But I wanted to thank, in particular, the French Embassy, both the French Embassy in Washington, D.C., who work closely with us, and really, above all, the French consulate in Houston. They've been with us on the ground doing this from the very beginning, very involved in finding speakers and shaping the program. And so it's my great pleasure to have the Honorable Frédéric Bontemps here to deliver a few remarks at the very beginning. And I think we can call him the person who's going to officially welcome you. I'm here to thank you for all coming. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Weber, Dr. Bio, dear friends. I would like first to thank the University of Texas at Austin for the organization of this conference, which benefits, as you heard, of the support from the French Cultural and Scientific Services, both at the consulate and at the embassy. I was asked to deliver some preliminary remarks for this conference, and honestly, I'm not a specialist of energy, so I was a little bit concerned, but my wife explained to me, don't worry, coming from a French diplomat, they will have exactly no expectations. And very kindly, she added, and you will meet them. I will try to be careful speaking in front of such a distinguished assembly, and I will therefore limit my remarks to some very general approaches. The topic of the conference is comparative energy policies and technologies in France and in the USA. And this is, of course, a very fascinating subject, but one that I would like to approach carefully. There may be a deceiving impression of similarity, of familiarity between the two countries. France and the USA are both industrialized countries. Regarding energy, they share to a certain extent the same aims. On both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, we want to have access to safe, reliable, and clean energy with a sufficient amount to meet all our needs, and with a price consistent with the competitiveness of our economies. But at the same point, the perspectives are very different between France and the USA on some key issues. Are we going to need more or less energy in the future? Is energy independency a real issue? How do we weigh energy availability against environmental concerns? For all these questions and many others, we do not share exactly the same sensitivity. And I think that our approaches are linked to totally different geographic and historical context. And as always, it starts with geography. In France, all sources of domestic sources of conventional non-renewable energy have been depleted, roughly. Coal, oil, gas. In the USA, you still have incredibly large reserves, even in conventional energy. And here I say independently of the perspectives opened by shale gas and shale oil. France is a much smaller country with a much higher density of population. Human geography is also very different. We have smaller and more concentrated cities. In the USA, you have these very large spread out cities with huge suburbs, as we can see here in Texas. And of course, it makes urban mass transit economically more difficult to sustain. Intercity mass transit, such as a high-speed train that we have in France, is less convenient here. You have, generally speaking, lower energy efficiency in housing, and so on. There are a lot of different points between our situations. Also, France has less space to implement energy-producing facilities on its territory. And we have to protect not only our population, not only our water resources, but also our landscapes. France is the #1 touristic destination in the world, and this is a real issue when it comes to drilling wells for oil or gas production, but also for the implementation of large windmills, for example. And when we start with geography, we have to go on with history, and there too we have different experiences. France is fully integrated in the European Union. I'm talking about physical integration with European grids for energy, about institutional integration with European rules, common rules in a lot of different sectors, and I'm talking about economic integration too, with very large European utility companies. No policy can be developed in France without taking into account the situation of our neighbors. France has chosen to develop its own energy policy based on nuclear electricity. You know that today, nuclear power plants account for 80% of the electricity that we use in France, roughly. This legacy shapes the new strategies that we can design. And I have to be very clear on this. France is not going to move out of nuclear energy. The decision that has been taken is to reduce the proportion of nuclear energy in our electricity mix. It should decrease gradually from 80% to maybe 50%, in particular by relying more on renewable sources of energy. In concrete terms, in the short term, we are going to close one nuclear power plant, which is the oldest that we have today. But at the same time, we'll go on with the construction of the third-generation new nuclear power plants. So this is a very important part of our policy, and it's something that we have to keep in mind when we talk about the French nuclear energy policies. France has a very long tradition of centralized government and central regulation. The move towards deregulation and more competition is much more recent here in France than it is here. And I could go on. These are just some key points to highlight the fact that our history is very specific and far from being comparable to your own situation in the USA. And from geography and history, I would like to move finally to policies and to address just 2 points. The first one is, you know that in France we have a very high sensibility to the environmental issues, to global warming, and to CO2 emissions. France has taken strong commitments to reduce its CO2 emissions. They are already much lower today than they were 15 years ago, while at the same time the French population continues to grow. And we have new commitments at the European level, and we should try to reduce our emissions by 20% more in the coming years. At the same time, the CO2 emissions per capita in the USA are also reducing, but not in the same proportion, and the per capita ratio here is 4 times higher than in France. And we are convinced in France that tremendous efforts are needed if we want to keep the global warming of the planet within the +2 degrees Celsius limits. You are all aware of it, I'm sure, but there is just one figure that I would like to put forward. In order to stay within this limit of +2 degrees, we still have to reduce the per capita emissions in France by 80%, 80. That means just to 1/5 of the current level. And that means that for the USA, you should have to reduce your emissions by more than 90%. So you see the tremendous effort that is needed if we want to achieve this. And I would like to remind you that Chinese per capita emissions today are already higher than they are in France. And China is still growing at almost 10% per year. So you see that it's only going to worsen, and you see the incredible efforts that are needed if we want to keep the climate under control. You will have the opportunity to discuss all these subjects in depth today. And before I give the floor to the next speaker, I think I have to say a few words regarding the one specific subject that I've been careful to avoid until now. I mean the shale gas, of course. The shale gas production is not forbidden in France. What is forbidden is the hydraulic fracturing process to produce shale gas. So, and for reasons that you can easily deduce from what I said before. But naturally, the two things are very closely linked today. Today, no fracking, no shale gas, we know it. But the situation can evolve. A lot of researches are being conducted, and especially here in the USA, on new methods to make this resource available without hydraulic fracturing. And I'm confident that someday we will have the possibility to exploit shale gas with these new technologies. And that day, the question of exploitation of the potential reserves of shale gas in France will be on the table again. And I say potential reserves because we still don't know if there is any reserve in France. We have some good reasons to believe that there are reserves, but today we don't know. So I know that this is an issue that you will discuss today. I have already been much too long. I wish you a very fruitful day of discussions, and thank you for your attention.